So I've been spending a slightly annoying amount of time on TikTok recently, and I found that there's actually a lot of people giving some really good study tips advice. And because I built this YouTube channel off of being what I like to think, some of the best study advice on the market, as it were, I thought we would do a video reacting to 7 of the best study tips that TikTokers have provided for us for our entertainment and for our education. Let's get into it.
How many times did it happen to you that you read and reread something you need or want to learn, only to find yourself unable to recall anything a few hours later? If that's the case, you're not alone. The feignment technique is derived from Richard Feynman's study and teaching methods and technique. The first step is to choose a concept you want to learn. Second, explain the concept that you're teaching it to a child. Very, very simple. Third, identify knowledge gaps and see where you're lacking understanding. Fourth, go through it again until you learn it.
This is a really good TikTok, but this guy's absolutely spot on. Feynman technique, explain something as if you're explaining it to a child. The idea is that when you break something down, I think Einstein famously said it, if you can't explain something simply, it just means you don't understand it well enough. And usually what I find is that you're explaining something as if you're explaining it to a child, and then at some point you're like, if they were to ask me why, point 4 does not necessarily lead to point 5, and I actually don't know where the hole in my knowledge is. And the fact that I know that now means I can go back over my material and figure out specifically the answer to that question. It's a very active process. The thing we're concerned about when it comes to studying or learning anything is active recall. We want to be testing ourselves. What we don't want to be doing is just passively rereading the information. And it can be very easy to fool ourselves into thinking, as I read Elon Musk's book. As you're reading, you're like, yeah, I agree. And we can just kind of fool ourselves into thinking we understand the thing. But it's only when we actually try and explain it as if it's to a friend or to a 5-year-old that we realize, oh crap, I actually maybe didn't get that little bit. And then we can do a targeted search in the book for that bit. I'm not a fan of randomly reading stuff or randomly rereading stuff. You need to recall, fill the holes, and then life is good.
If you find it hard to focus, I've got my 2 best study hacks for you. Now the first one involves a tomato. Now the Pomodoro effect is named after the tomato-shaped timer that you can use to track your work. So to start with, set your timer
Bloody hell, she's huge on TikTok. 2.9 million followers.
For 25 minutes. Then focus intensely on your project for the 25 minutes. When the timer goes off, then it's time to stop. Then make sure you get up and move away from the books. This is where part 2 comes in. Now you can take this time to rest and refresh with a glass of water, but here's hack number 2. If you want to level up your learning and improve your performance after the break, use the time for exercise. Keep the breaks short, and after 4 cycles, then take a nice long break.
Yeah, Pomodoro technique is pretty solid. I think the exercise thing is interesting. And there's a bunch of evidence for this. There's this paper from 2007 that showed when you get rats in a maze and you teach them how to use the maze and you make them exercise, then the memory acquisition and consolidation of how to do the maze is improved. I'm not sure whether they've done the study much in humans. I will have to do a little bit of digging to find out. But, Dr. Julie Smith knows what she's talking about. There's probably a decent evidence base for this. I just don't know it off the top of my head. Pomodoro technique, reasonable 25 minutes work, 5 minutes rest. I find that if I really need to motivate myself to do some work and I really don't want to, then the Pomodoro technique is great.
Interleaving is when you weave concepts in and out from one another so that you have to distinguish between different pieces of information while you are retrieving. The distinguishing of different pieces of information is a productive struggle in which your brain is helping store information in a more meaningful way. Interleaving helps you retrieve information for longer periods of time.
That's actually a very good point. Interleaving is one of the evidence-based study tips. It's not quite as effective as active recall and spaced repetition, but within our model of effective study tips, interleaving would probably be rank number 3 of things that I definitely would incorporate into my study routine. And one of the reasons why this works is something that they call discriminative contrast, which is basically the idea that as you're doing things that are different, as you're forcing your brain to context switch, your brain is having to work harder. And it's just a general staple of study techniques that when your brain is working hard, that's when you're retaining information the most. There's a cool study they did back in 2010, which was on 7th graders in America, where they got some of them to do their maths homework in blocks, like she talks about in the TikTok, and they got others to do them interleaved, like one problem and then another one and then another one of different types. And then when they tested them on a surprise test, the interleavers got an extra 25% on the test. But also when they tested them 1 month later, the interleavers got 76% higher marks. I mean, obviously you can't read too much into one study, and I don't want to go into study design and all that kind of stuff, but there is very strong evidence across the board that interleaving is really, really helpful. So this is a fantastic study TikTok tip.
If you are struggling revising for an exam, here is a tip that is guaranteed to help you remember information. and it involves perfume. When you start to do your revision, spray some perfume, and it has to be a perfume that you've never had before, so a brand new smell. And then each time you go back to revise some more information for the same subject, spray the perfume again. And then when you go into your exam, make sure you're wearing the same perfume. Don't wear it any other time, just when you're revising and when you're in the exam. Now, this triggers something in your brain called the olfactory memory, which links scents and odours to memory, events, information. Your brain will link that smell to the information that you were trying to learn. So every time you smell it, you'll just remember what you were revising.
Okay, this sounds weird. This is actually a thing. In the literature, they call it odor cueing. And it's the idea that you smell something and it like reminds you vividly of the time where you smelt that thing before or you smelt that thing a lot. And there is actually decent evidence that odor cueing is a thing. There is an interesting study in Nature where they talked about how odor cueing actually helps with recall when it comes to studying for stuff. And the idea is that when you're smelling the smell, then the olfactory neurons in your brain and the olfactory bulb, they get a signal of what that smell smells like. But then the olfactory bulb connects to the amygdala and the hippocampus, and the amygdala and the hippocampus are both involved in the formation and storage of memory. And so the theory goes that you have this olfactory memory thing, you smell a smell, it goes through your amygdala and hippocampus, and then the fact that your memory is associated with the smell helps that memory theoretically become stronger. I've never tried this myself. I didn't know this was a thing until like while I was in med school, but next time I study for an exam, I'm gonna get some fragrances and just use this and see if it actually works in my N=1 sample study of myself. And there's like a bonus tip here that you didn't talk about in the TikTok, which is that if you smell the smell while you're sleeping, allegedly, there's some evidence that that actually helps encode the memory a little bit stronger as well. So try it out, let me know in the comments what you think.
If you've been studying for hours but feel like you're forgetting everything immediately after, I have a solution for you. In the 1800s, a German psychologist, Hermann Ebbinghaus, showed that we forget 50% of everything we learned within the first hour. He called it the forgetting curve. Later studies showed that if you space out the information you're learning, you will remember more details and forget things slower. So use the following formula for some memory magic. At the end of the study session, spend 5 minutes reviewing what you had just learned. Do it again after a short break. Do it again at the end of the day. And the next morning after you learned. Review the material a week later. And then review every couple of weeks until it sticks permanently.
That's it. Spaced repetition. It's the classic. What she says is spot on. Ebbinghaus's forgetting curve, the whole memory decay, exponential decay. It works. Spaced repetition, testing yourself and spacing your testing of yourself over time is absolutely guaranteed to make your performance in exams and in anything that you're trying to learn significantly better. And if you want to put some numbers on it, the rough averages are that within 20 minutes, you will recall only 60% of the information that you learned, 50% by an hour, and 20% 31 days afterwards. So if you've studied something and you come back at it a month later, and you only remember a fifth of it or less, don't worry, that's entirely normal. It is literally how the forgetting curve and how memory works. And the trick here is that once you've learned something, you want to recall the thing at various time intervals, but you should space out those time intervals over time. So the formula she talks about in her TikTok is you learn something, you recall it shortly after, you could recall it 5 minutes later, you recall it at the end of the day, you recall it the next morning, and then the next week, and then every couple of weeks. Generally, the way I did it in med school was 2 weeks, and then 4 weeks, and then kind of spread it out a bit longer. But generally, people search for study tips when they are cramming for exams. And so you have to figure out what your window of studying or revision is for the thing that you want to learn, assuming you're learning something for the purposes of an exam or a deadline, and then figure out what is a reasonable spaced repetition intervals to break that down into.
Procrastinating on your tasks or feeling lonely while studying, either join a study session or make your own. There's also a great...
Okay, the music here was a little bit jarring, but social studying, it's absolutely a thing. If you study with friends, it's just more fun than studying on your own. And if you're stuck in lockdown and that kind of stuff, you actually can just do the social studying stuff on Zoom. It's not as fun as like doing it in real life. I was a big fan back in the day of getting all my friends into the library of my college together, and we'd all be studying different things, but we'd all be studying together, and we'd be doing the Pomodoro technique actually together. And we formed a WhatsApp group called Pomodoro Society, which then got abbreviated to PomSoc. And that WhatsApp group is still active to this day, like 8 years later. You know, there's that phrase, friends who study together, stay together. So 100% recommend studying with friends. You can do it over Zoom. There's a company I've actually invested in called StudyStream that does these sort of live streamy study sessions. That's kind of useful if I genuinely need some like motivation and studying with friends, and I'm not running my own Zoom co-working sessions, I'll just hop onto a StudyStream, and like it makes it feel so much better studying or working or doing anything when we're doing it with other people. One of the theories around why this works, and again, like we don't quite understand it fully, is that when you're hanging out with your mates, you release dopamine and you release oxytocin, which is sort of the bonding hormone, and dopamine is sort of like the motivation hormone in a way. And there is some evidence, like they did a study with rats where they got the rats to learn something and injected some of them with dopamine and others did not have dopamine. And they found that the rats injected with dopamine had better performance on memory after the fact rather than the rats not injected with dopamine. And if we extrapolate that, theoretically, the idea is that when you have dopamine flooding through your system because you're hanging out with your mates, that theoretically might improve memory.
There are 3 main forms of active recall. I'm going to do a video on each one. This first one is going to be on flashcards. Don't do that thing where you read the material and then you go back, make flashcards, and then do the flashcards. The first time that you read that material, you're going to forget it anyway. So while you're reading for the first time, just make the flashcards as you're reading it for the first time. Make 2 decks. One deck is for concepts. The other one's for those rapid fire, very small, stupid facts you have to memorize. Study the concepts first and then study the rapid fire questions. If you do rapid fire questions first, then you're just going to be memorizing random facts with no real knowledge. The best app I recommend is Quizlet when you're cramming, which it seems like some of you guys are doing.
Okay, this is pretty spot on. I wouldn't personally recommend Quizlet. I actually prefer Anki. I think Anki is a bit more powerful, but Quizlet is quite pretty, and part of studying well and learning stuff is to have fun while doing it. And if the app you're using is a bit more pretty and it makes you more likely to do the studying, then by all means use Quizlet rather than Anki, because Anki is a bit janky. Like obviously active recall is the ultimate. It's the granddaddy, the big daddy of all the study techniques, and it's got an absolute treasure trove of evidence supporting why active recall, i.e. testing yourself through either flashcards or through like different techniques, why testing yourself is the ultimate way of learning absolutely anything. His method for flashcards is interesting. I haven't come across that one before, where you separate out concepts from random facts. And I think that's actually really good, because one of the dangers with flashcards, and I've made a Skillshare class about how to study with flashcards, link in the video description if you want to check it out, if you're interested. One of the dangers with flashcards that I talk about a lot when giving people advice about this is that it's very easy to end up learning random itty-bitty facts here and there and kind of losing the forest from the trees. Whereas what this guy's saying is if you study the concepts first, then you've got the forest, and then you can like memorize the random facts for the trees. But if you do it the other way around, you'll end up with a very incomplete picture of what's actually going on. So Dr. Toff, pretty solid advice. Gonna follow you on TikTok. This guy knows what he's talking about. So hopefully you found that interesting. Do please send me more TikToks my way and IG Reels and all that kind of stuff. Feel free to link it in the comment down below, or like email me, ali@aliabdaal.com, or like tweet at me, or like Instagram DM me. I wanna see more of this stuff. Because I don't know, the world of content creators is kind of changing. And like back in the day, long form, half an hour long YouTube video about how to study for exams. That's how my channel started to take off like 4 years ago when I made one of those videos. And now there's these kids on TikTok putting together like a video that takes 10 minutes to put together and actually giving really good facts and really good information. And this seems to be how the youth of today, fellow kids, are consuming content. So I wanna see more of this. Maybe I should start doing study tips on TikTok if I can find a way to give myself an exam to prepare for. But anyway, if you like this video, check out this video over here, which is 6 kind of evidence-based ways to improve your memory, which talks about memory palaces and talks about techniques that memory experts use to improve their memory, sort of orthogonal to the studying stuff. Thank you so much for watching. Do hit the subscribe button and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.